Okay, so we've looked at if statements, if-else statements, and multiple alternative statements like if, else. Another type of multiple alternative statement is the switch statement. So in this tutorial, we're going to learn how to code switch statements. Let's take a brief glance at our syntax for a switch statement. Unlike if statements where we have a test condition, for a switch statement we have a test expression. Typically it's just a variable. Now you're going to test the value of that variable using these cases. So it's keyword case, and then you have whatever you want to test. In this case, it would look for the number 1. If you wanted it to look for a string value of number 1, you would have to put quotation marks around it like this. Okay? But this would be for the number 1. If the value of the test expression is 1, then it would execute these code statements. You have to include a break statement. I'll show you why and demonstrate why. And then you can test for another condition in this case too. Again, you need to break. And then a default statement, and this is just the code. If nothing else matches that test expression, this is the code that's going to execute. So we're going to look at this in two separate projects. One's kind of fun. I have in your Google Drive folder, you should have a file called BG color. And we are going to use a switch statement to change the background color of our web page based on the color that the user enters. Okay, so let's get started. Let's include our script tags right before our body closes. And we already currently on this page have an H1 that says choose the background for this page. And then we have a button that when the user clicks that button, we'll have our function execute. Notice it has an ID of color button. Okay, let's create a new function called change color. And because we know that we want this function to execute on the click of this button, let's go ahead and do our event listener. We can switch our order in our code. We're flexible. We're fun like that. So below the closing curly bracket, let's do our document.getElementById to get to the color button and add our event listener on click to execute the change color function. Now inside this function, let's prompt the user to enter a color. We're going to store what the user enters in a variable called color. Now let's code our switch statement. Using the keyword switch, in parentheses, we don't put a test condition, we put a test expression. In this case, we want to test the value of color. So we'll just put color in there. Now your whole switch statement needs to be encapsulated in a set of curly brackets. I'm going to incorrectly code this first switch statement without our break statements so that you better understand what the break statements do, and then we'll go back and add the break statements in a moment. Okay? So browsers recognize 140 color names. And these are specific names, so there are some crazy ones like Alice Blue and Cornflower Blue and Dark Goldenrod. But there are also the common colors just like gold, green, gray. Okay, so we'll just do some basic colors. So let's say if the user enters green, we want to change the background color to green. So we use our keyword case and then what we want to test for. So we want to test for green. Okay, now we do a colon, not a semicolon. Okay, now on code, if you're using Visual Studio Code and you press enter here, it's going to insert this word. I'm going to press the space bar and then press enter to avoid that. I'm indenting just for the purposes of readability, but you don't have to indent. It just makes your code easier to read. Okay, so we're going to say document, and don't worry about this code. This is not what I'm trying to show you. We'll learn more about the DOM and how this code works later. But we'll do document.body.bg color equals green. Okay, so that's going to set our background color to green. Let's test this in a browser and see if it works. Refreshing this page, enter a color. I'm going to type in green and click OK, and now my background color is green. So it does work. Okay, so let's try another color. How about case is it yellow? Remember, colon, not semicolon. And if I press enter now, it's going to put switch, the keyword switch in there. So hit the space bar and then press enter. And we'll do document.body.bg color has a value of yellow. Okay, so let's test it and see if it works. Refresh. If I type in yellow, oh, it gets a yellow color. If I type in green, wait, what? I typed in green. Well, it was working before. What's going on? This is why the break statement is so handy. The way the switch statement works, you have to tell the code to break out of the switch statement once a condition has been met. So in the case of color having the value of green, we want this code to execute, and then we want to break out of the switch statement. The keyword break can be used in other programming, other control structures. We can use it in loops and other things. And basically the break means ignore all of the rest of the code until you get to the next curly bracket. After that curly bracket, you can execute whatever code is behind that, but your browser is going to ignore this line of code, and how many other lines of code are after it. Okay? So now if we refresh and test and type in green, it works. And if we type in yellow, it works. Okay? So don't forget about that break statement. I'm going to go ahead and add my break statement to yellow. And if you want to add another color, feel free. So this will be if the user types blue. But what happens if the user types something? I'm only giving them 3 options. So should the user know some way, or shouldn't the user know somehow that what they typed was not a valid color? Remember, there's only 140 colors, and we would have to code all 140 of those colors, and we're not going to do that. But even then, the user could type in something that's not one of the colors on this list. So the default code block in a switch statement, by using the keyword default colon, is going to catch everything else that the user types. Okay? So, oh, I forgot to hit my space bar. So let's just say we'll do a window.alert. You know, that was something that we covered in the first chapter. It just creates a little pop-up box, and it'll say, that's not a color option. Okay? So let's test our code again. I know that yellow works, right? I know that green works. And let's test blue. Whoop. Well, blue didn't work. Why didn't blue work? Because I didn't put the break. Let's try it again. Well, refresh. Now, there we go. And if I enter something like purple that is not on my list, I get the pop-up that says this is not a color option. Okay? So the default is kind of your catch-all. Anything that's not going to be have code executed for it being a potential value of our test expression, we can add to our default section. Okay? All right, let's try this with another project. Open the file ratewebsite.html, and this is kind of similar to our grade project. where you take a numeric value and you assign it a letter grade. The problem in using case statements for that is we would literally have to type 100 case statements. So we're not going to do that. We're going to pretend that we have a website and we're asking users to rate the website on a scale of 1 to 10. A 10 is an A 9, 8, or 7 would be a B, a 6, 5, or 4 would be a C, a 3, 2, or 1 would be a D, and then if they say anything else, we're going to say that's an invalid entry. Now let's go back and just really quickly, I'm going to glance back at the last project we did. Notice in these cases, we were testing for string values. If we are testing for string values, we have to include quotation marks. Strings always have quotation marks. But in this case, we're going to test for numbers. So keep that in mind when we start coding. Let's include our script tags. On this website, I have a paragraph with an ID result. Now, remember, this ID can change. We can call it whatever we want to, so I didn't want you to get too used to the IDs always being called para or button. You should call them kind of what they do or what they are. And our button has an ID of ID rate button. Let's create a new function called show rating. Don't forget about those curly brackets. And we're going to ask the user for a rating and store it in a variable called rating. This is going to be a number. We might want to do math with it. So let's parse int and then prompt the user to rate, forgot my quotations, rate this site from 1 to 10. I'm also going to create a variable without initializing it called grade, and this will be the letter grade, whether A, B, C, or D. Remember, switch statements start with the keyword switch, and then we have a test expression. What is the value we want to test with this statement? We want to test what the user types in rating. Switch statements are encapsulated in a set of a set of curly brackets, and then we simply add our cases. So in the case that this is 10, now this is not a string value, this is a number, so I don't include quotation marks. In the case that it is 10, we're going to have grade have a value of A. That's a string value, so it has to have quotation marks. If that's true, then we want to break out of the switch statement and it'll stop executing the code. But in the case that it is 9, in the case that it is 8, and in the case that it is 7, we want to assign a B to grade. So grade equals B. Now if it is B, we need to break out of the switch statement, so we'll include a break. In the case that it is 6, in the case that it is 5, and in the case that it is 4, we'll assign a grade of C. And then we'll break out of that statement. Now if they enter a 3, a 2, or a 1, that's a D. So we'll do grade equals D. And then of course break out of the switch statement. Let's add a default. And for the default, we'll say grade has a value of invalid entry. Please rate the site from 1 to 10. It's always good to be very clear with your messages to the user so that they understand how they can fix their issue. Okay, Now we have input, we have processing, but we don't yet have any output. So inside our function, but below our switch statement, so below that curly bracket, but still inside this curly bracket, let's get to our paragraph that was called result. And again, we want to get inside that paragraph. So this gets us here. To get here, we have to do enter HTML. And let's give that object a new value of your rating is an space concatenated with the value of grade. Okay? Now our function doesn't do anything until we call it. So let's do our event listener on that button. I think it was called rate button. See, we can check up here. It's called rate button. And we want to add an event listener to that so that when it is clicked, it executes the function show rating. Okay, let's test our code and see if it works. Now again, when you're doing these multiple statements, you need to do a lot of testing with your program to make sure that you don't have any unforeseen errors. Okay, so we're going to rate all of them. We'll say 10. Your rating is an A. 9 should be a B. 8 should be a B. 7 should be a B. Now 6 should be a C. 5 should be a C. 4 C, and then the rest should be D's. 3, 2, 1. Okay, now what about 0? Your rating is an invalid entry. Please rate the site from 1 to 10. So see how we gave the user a really clear error message? If we typed in 11, we would get that same error message. Okay? So here it was kind of cool that we could include these cases and not include breaks. So what happens if the user enters a 7 for the rating? It checks this case and it says, oh, no, that's false. So it goes to the next case, that's false. It goes to that case, that's false. It goes to that case and it says, oh, that's true. I need to execute this code. It executes this code and then it breaks out of the loop. So it goes all the way down here and then it starts executing code. Okay? So remember the break, and again, doesn't have to just be used in a switch statement, will take you or takes the browser to the next closing curly bracket, and then the code will execute after that closing curly bracket. Okay, so your project on your own is to code a switch statement that will tell you whether you are a freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior based on what number the user types in. Okay, so this is a demonstration of it. If I click the button, I get this prompt box, enter your grade. So if I say 9, it says you are a freshman. If I say 10, you are a sophomore. If I say 11, you are a junior. If I say 12, you are a senior. This error message is kind of wonky, but that's okay. We haven't learned exactly how to fix that yet. But if I said, oh, I'm in 8th grade, it says you are an error, invalid high school grade. Please enter grade 9 through 12. Okay, so I know that syntax is a little funny there, but or that the structure of the sentence is a little funny there, but that's okay. We're more focused on trying to learn how the switch statement operates. Okay, so if you have questions, email me, but this is your project. The guidelines are on our website. Okay, so this video you're watching should have been here, and then your guidelines are here. So I already have the high school file in your Google Drive folder, but if you don't have any of these files, please email me so that I can get them to you really quickly. Okay, after this is your test. It is a lot of code review, so do your best, but again, if you have questions, let me know. Happy coding!